Hello everyone, and welcome to the R3 2017 release webinar for Kendo UI. My name is John Bristow. On behalf of all of us at Progress, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to hear about our latest release. Joining me during today's webinar is my colleague Tara, and together, we'll walk you through the latest features and updates we've made to Kendo UI. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that all the bits we'll be showing you here are available online. So, make sure to fire up the telric control panel to download the latest updates. Individual product updates are also available through your account page on telric.com. Now, I know it can be tough to sit through an entire webinar. It's easy to get distracted or pulled away from your desk. If that happens, don't worry. This webinar is being recorded and will be available up on YouTube. You can find our channel at youtube.com/telric. We'll be answering your questions during this webinar on Twitter through the Hey Kendo UI hashtag. Make sure to use this hashtag because it will help us find those questions. Also, we'll be giving out a special prize to the best question that's asked, so it's in your best interest to ask and ask often. It's our way of thanking you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And please note that this prize is subject to our sweepstake rules. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. Everyone should keep an eye open on the wrap-up blog post that we'll be publishing shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. You'll find this up on the Telric blog site, which should be your homepage, and if it's not, please subscribe to the RSS feed or bookmark it. You can find the Telric blog site at blogs.telric.com. Another bookmark-worthy site is the Telric Developer Network. There you'll find articles on topics that are relevant to you. Recently, we've been talking a lot about JavaScript, Angular, CSS, and a whole host of other things. You can find the Telric Developer Network, or TDN, at developer.telric.com. And now, on to the main part of our webinar. Kendo UI is our UI framework for building rich HTML5 and JavaScript apps for any platform, browser, or device. It features many robust controls that are beautifully themed and responsive. Support for third-party frameworks is extensive, with libraries like jQuery, Angular, Vue, React, and AngularJS. The R3 2017 release is packed with features. In fact, this release is one of our biggest to date. Not only have we improved the product and added new features, we're introducing two new products, wrappers for Vue and React. Tara will be talking about these in just a bit. For now, I'd like to walk you through the changes we made to our core library and Angular components. So let's start with the updates we've made to the core library of Kendo UI. The Sass Theme Builder was introduced in the R2 2017 release. It's a WYSIWYG tool that's designed to help you create custom themes based on built-in ones that ship with Kendo UI, namely Default and Bootstrap. In our latest release, we've made a number of updates to the Sass Theme Builder and the Kendo UI themes, including updated support for Bootstrap v4, which shipped as a beta release just a few weeks ago. Now let's move on to some of the improvements made to the widgets in Kendo UI for jQuery. The grid continues to be one of the most popular widgets. In this release, we've added a number of features that you'll love. The first one is infinite scrolling. Infinite scrolling, also known as endless scrolling, is a new feature of the grid. It enables the ability to display large amounts of data by appending additional pages of data on demand. Loading of new items occurs when the scroll bar of the grid reaches the bottom of its view. When data is returned, only new items will be rendered and appended to existing ones. The great news is that infinite scrolling works for both local and remote data. It's also compatible with grouping, hierarchy, and editing. Let's see how this works. Here we have a grid on the page that's bound to a set of 5,000 data items. You'll notice that as we scroll to the bottom of the view, items are populated on the bottom. Switching over to the code, you can see it's easy to configure the grid to support infinite scrolling. Specifying the endless value of the scrollable property to be true will enable this functionality. This functionality is supported even after you perform operations against the grid. For example, you'll notice that if I sort one of the columns and then scroll to the bottom of the view, the grid automatically fetches the next items as determined by the page size on the bound data source. Now, in this case, the data is local. However, this functionality would work with data from a remote data source as well. While we're on the topic of scrolling, I'd like to highlight another update to the grid that enables support for CRUD operations against one that employs virtual scrolling. Virtual scrolling was introduced in the previous release. It's a feature that's super useful when working with large amounts of data in the grid. In this scenario, fetching and processing of this data at once would impose a performance penalty due to limited browser resources. Virtual scrolling helps in this situation by automatically requesting rows when the page size of the bound data source is exceeded. The nice thing here is that with virtual scrolling, you can now perform CRUD operations against a local data source. Sticking with the grid, we've implemented a small change to the behavior of the pager widget. This is what allows you to control the page index that the grid is displaying. It turns out that sometimes all items in the grid can fit into a single page. If this is the case, then showing the pager might not be necessary. With this release, we've added the pageable.alwaysVisible configuration property to allow you to tune this behavior. Let's switch over to the scheduler. This is a very popular widget because it provides a great user experience for event planning and coordination. It's responsive, flexible, and provides a wide variety of features. In the R3 2017 release, we've improved the scheduler by allowing events to span across days in the timeline view. This is super useful in scenarios where events might occur overnight or over a long period of time. Here's a quick example. As you can see, I have a scheduler here on the page that has a timeline view configured to span across 2 days. I can create and modify events, as well as switch the timeline view to different hours. Now I'd like to talk briefly about accessibility. Our engineers have worked incredibly hard for this release to provide updates to our accessibility compliance across the entire framework. This includes adhering to standards like ARIA and Section 508. You can find out more by visiting our documentation. While you're there, you should also check out the shortcuts and keyboard navigation improvements we've made to each control. Speaking of documentation, did you know that we now have an acknowledge-based section? Check it out. It features a lot of code examples that target customer how-tos and questions that have been asked on Stack Overflow. Alright, now let's switch gears and talk about the latest and greatest features we've added to our Angular components. We've added a ton of features and updates to the R3 2017 release of Kendo UI for Angular, our native set of Angular UI components. Let's start with an important update to our built-in theme support. As you know, Kendo UI for Angular ships with a default theme and a bootstrap theme. This release introduces a preview of our material theme, which is based on the material design guidelines. This is a Sassy CSS-based theme that's supported across various components. Let's see how this works by using the example from our Getting Started guide. It's a simple page with a button component that will change the heading text when clicked. The button component on this page has the default theme applied to it. Let's see how we can use the new material theme. The themes in Kendo UI for Angular are distributed as separate NPM packages. You can also use Yarn as well. To include a theme in your application, you can either use the precompiled all.css file or customize the theme styles by loading the theme source files through the application build process. In this example, we'll go the latter route. First, we'll install the material theme into the working directory. Next, we'll update our styles to import the material theme. Webpack will spot the change, compile the changes, and then reload the page. As you can see, the appearance of the button component has now changed to reflect the material theme. Now, as I stated earlier, this is a preview of the material theme support across various components in Kendo UI for Angular. This theme can be applied to components like the text box, button group, checkbox, radio button, and chart. Make sure to check out the repo up on GitHub for more information about the material theme support in Kendo UI for Angular. We also have documentation on the variables you can target if you wish to override the material theme. Let's now talk about components. Kendo UI for Angular ships with many powerful components. In this release, we've added a new one called the TimePicker. As the name implies, this component provides a time selection control with a dropdown. Let's see how this works. We'll start with an existing project that I've generated using the Angular CLI called Kendo TimePicker. It's basically the same page you saw in the previous demo, except there are no components present on this page. Next, we'll add the date inputs package to our project, which includes the new TimePicker component. Once these packages are added to our project, the next step is to integrate the TimePicker module into the ng module. Once imported, we can now add the Kendo TimePicker directive to our template to utilize it. The value property binding is defined underneath in our component. With this in place, we can see that the page has now been updated and displays the TimePicker component. The component itself is highly interactive and customizable. For example, you can navigate through time values using the keyboard or mouse, set ranges with minimum or maximum values, and specify time formats for different cultures. The TimePicker can be used in both template-driven forms, as you saw, and reactive forms through the form group decorator. It's a really nice component and one that we hope you'll start using today. Another new component in the R3 2017 release of Kendo UI for Angular is the RangeArea chart. Unlike an area chart which is filled right to the axis, the RangeArea chart is filled between its minimum and maximum values. This makes it ideal for plotting values like temperature. Here I have one such chart. As you can see, the values are plotting within this range. Looking at the underlying code, we're using the same Kendo chart directive as with other charts. The only difference is that we've specified the type property as RangeArea. While we're on the subject of components, let's now take a look at one of the most popular ones in Kendo UI for Angular, the grid. Many of our customers have asked us about adding more features to the grid, and I'm happy to report that we've added many new features to it in this latest release. One example is selection. The grid today offers a sort of classic selection of single and multiple items, but we wanted to add support for richer scenarios like checkbox-only selection for selecting and deselecting rows. Another example is in-cell editing. Not everyone wants to put entire rows in edit mode or work with a bulky external form just to update single cells here and there. The grid now provides editing on a cell-by-cell level. This dramatically improves the overall user experience and user effectiveness when editing data in this manner. And finally, if you're binding to the grid with large sets of data, and let's be honest, that's most of us, we've added a powerful configuration option that allows you to combine virtual scrolling with grouped data. It should be noted that this feature is available only through a binding of in-memory data. Let's take a look at these new features in action. Here, we have a page with a grid that's bound to some data. Let's modify this grid to demonstrate the latest improvements we've made to the R3 2017 release. First, we'll enable checkbox-based selection through the selectable option. I'll do this by specifying a value that can be either a Boolean or of type selectable settings. Here, I'll set this to a selectable settings parameter with checkbox only set to true and its mode set to multiple. I'll then add a Kendo Grid's checkbox column to the grid to display the checkboxes for selection. Once Webpack picks up these changes and rebuilds the project, you can see that the grid now has a checkbox-based column for selecting multiple rows. Let's now enable in-cell editing. Here, I have the same grid as before, except this time I've made a few changes to the underlying code. First, I've defined a form group to support plumbing needed for performing edits. Next, I've defined editors for each of the columns that we want to perform inline editing for. And finally, I've bound the Kendo Grid in-cell editing property to invoke createFormGroup. This will also take advantage of any validators defined in this method. With these changes in place, we can see that the grid now supports inline editing against the columns we specified earlier. Note that validators are present in the case of missing values or in the case of invalid input. At this point, I'd like to pass the webinar over to Tara, who has the honor of walking you through the latest products we've added to the Kendo UI family, our Kendo UI wrappers for Vue and React.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be here today with you because I get to walk you through our new UI component libraries for React and Vue. As you may be familiar with, the Kendo team has been building awesome UI component libraries for a while now, including our jQuery and Angular libraries, and we're super stoked to be able to bring you that same support for your Vue and React projects. We're going to go ahead and get started with React and just jump right in. To get our base React app, we're going to go ahead and globally install Create React App using npm install -g create React app. Create React app is basically a tool that helps us build our project up real fast so we can hit the ground running and not have to worry about build configuration, and just lets us concentrate on the code and get these things going and see how everything works with our new Kendo UI libraries. And once we have that installed, we can use Create React app to create our new awesome React Kendo project. An interesting thing about Create React app is just by default, it gives you the files you need to make your React application into a progressive web app. I won't go into detail about everything that means, but you'll see when we're going through our files that we have a manifest.json and a registerserviceworker.js file, and these are all components that you add to make your application a progressive web app. Just a fun little tidbit as we go through creating our app through Create React app. Once that's all set up, we can go ahead and go into our project directory, and we'll run npm start to see what we have right from the jump off point. So here we can see that our project is over at localhost 3000, so we'll make our way over to there and see that we have our starter React project. So far, so good. The first thing I want to do is open up our code so we can take a look and see what we have thus far so we know what we're working with. I'm using Visual Studio Code and just open up the whole directory from the command line. We can see some of the usuals in the main directory, the node modules folder, git ignore, package.json, and readme. We also have a public directory that houses our favicon and main index.html page, and that manifest.json file I was talking about earlier. This is a progressive web app helper that lets browsers know how to display your application. We'll be doing most of our work in the source file today, app.js to be exact. There's the service worker file, another PWA tool, and you'll see that we have a yarn lock file, but I'll actually be using npm instead of yarn. Besides npm 5 being super fast, you also get a default package.json lock file. Okay, if we take a look inside our app.js file, we see we're already importing a few things, and today we will be adding the ever so handy date picker from our Kendo UI library. This gives us a great looking UI component for users to input dates easily, and we just have to install a few modules and add a few lines to our components.js file. Although we would usually make a new component for our date picker, today we'll just keep it simple. The very first thing we're going to install is Kendo UI. Yay! And we'll do that using npm I to install @progress/kendo-ui. And with npm 5, you don't need to add the -- save to save it as a dependency. That is there by default. So we need this in order to use the UI component library, which is Kendo UI. The next thing I'm installing, I'm using Control R to backsearch to install our default styling for Kendo UI, basically saying, please make everything look nice without me having to do much work. One of my favorite things. And the last thing we'll install is our module of the hour, the Kendo Date Inputs React Wrapper. And this is where our calendar lives that we will be implementing inside of our application. Heading back to app.js, we'll import all the fun parts we just installed. First, Kendo UI, of course, then the default theme, and last but far from least, we import calendar from the date inputs module. At this point, I will save it and then save it again because I guess VS Code thought I wasn't serious. There we go. Then jump down into our template, remove the default filler, and add our calendar component. The first thing we'll add is the value, which we will bind to this.state.datetime. We will set this anytime we trigger a change by binding that change event to on change function, which we'll cover in a second. But first, we create a constructor passing it the props. Here we'll also pass props to super. We don't technically need to pass props to super because we're not using this.props currently in our constructor, but it is best practice to do this, what I like to call future safing your code. Next, we'll add datetime to this.state and assign it to the current date. The last thing we'll do inside our constructor is bind this to this.onChange so it knows what we're referring to. Finally, we create our onChange function, passing an E for the event that was triggered on the click. Whenever onChange is called, we want to set state to this to reassign datetime to the value in sender on the event object. If you want to see what this object looks like, you can add a console log before or after the setState function, and you can log out either E or e.sender. Okay, that's it. We have everything that we needed to add to our app.js file. Everything that we set to our calendar component, we went ahead and made a constructor so it's set as soon as we build our component, and we have our function for when we make changes and trigger the onChange function. We'll go ahead and click Control backtick to open up our terminal. I can't recall if I ran npm I when we first started, so I'll go ahead and run it again for safe measure and good tidings. And then we'll go ahead and clear that out and run npm start. So again, if we go back over to localhost 3000 and take a look, we should see our beautiful calendar. Yay! So you see, we have everything styled out because we imported that default styling. So that was all the work that we had to do to make it look this great and to have all those little interactions like the hoverovers and the color changes. And you even see that when you hover over a number, you will get that whole date time value with the day, month, date, year, all that information that you want from a calendar. So that was really easy. So that was the way that you will bring those components into your React projects. If you go back to KendoUI.com and look again at our support for React section, you'll get everything that I went over plus more. And at the very bottom, if you keep scrolling down, you'll see that there's also, instead of using npm, you can also do the cdn files. And that's basically letting you access these files from unpackaged CDN services, but also down here are all of the widgets that we have available for you to take advantage of. So if you get a chance, go there, check those out, and find all the fun things that you can do with our new support for React and Kendo UI. This release, we're also really excited to add support for Vue. Vue is also a really great library or framework. It's pretty lightweight, so it can be considered a library, but it's also very adaptable, so you can build it up into a framework. We're going to use the Vue CLI to create a project that we're going to incorporate our grid component into. So first things first, we globally install the Vue CLI. Then we're going to use Vue init and the Webpack template to create our awesome Vue Kendo app. You have many options for templates like PWA, Browserify, and even Simple to get the cleanest, simplest setup. The Vue CLI will guide us through a few questions to get set up, and we'll be more specific on some, but mostly we'll just say yes to everything. Then we can go into our project directory. Oh geez, I guess they want me to actually do it correctly. And we can run npm install to get all of our modules once we're in there. After everything is finally done installing, we can run npm start, which you can see in our package.json file is an npm script that says to run node on build/dev-server.js. Once that's built, we can navigate over to localhost port 8080 to see what we've got. Ta-da! It's a lovely starter Vue app. Okay, let's get back to the code. When we list out the main project directory, we have the usual suspects again, so let's open it up in VS Code to dig in. In build, we have some build files and build tool config files. Config has config files. But source is where we'll be doing most of our work. If we take a look at hello.view, we can see it's what we were being displayed on the starter app. The first thing we want to do is install what we need from Kendo, starting with Kendo UI. Like before, we don't add the -s flag because it is included by default from npm 5+. But the next two are actually dev dependencies, so we will add a -D flag. Then we need to install the grid wrapper for Vue, which will be npm i-D at progress/kendo grid Vue wrapper. This is the real meat of what we'll be using today. We'll also need the supporting character of data source to pull our data into the grid. Now, if we take a look at our package.json, we should see that the Kendo UI module is in its rightful place under dependencies, and the other two are under dev dependencies. So this time, instead of installing the default Kendo UI styling modules like we did with React, we will actually open up the index.html file and just paste the links to our style sheets. Next, we're going to go into our main.js file to let our Vue app know how to use all of our Kendo UI imports. First and most importantly, we add Kendo UI. Then the grid column, and the Kendo grid installer from the grid Vue wrapper module. Next will be the data source and data source installer. Followed by taking advantage of the Vue.use to use our plugins by passing in our installers. Then we add all of these, the data source, the grid column, to our Vue app in the components object. After that, we just save and close and never touch our main.js file again. For now, at least. At times like this, I like to run npm start to see if we've broken anything. And seems like I've forgotten the ever important from in my import statements. Notice how I also had a red squiggly line there. I guess I have to edit the main.js file sooner than I thought. I'll save it again and see we have a successful compile. Let's go ahead and take a look at the browser to make sure there are no errors there either. Clear view on this window as well. See what I did there? Okay, back at it. We can definitely close main.js now and move on. Real quick, I want to nip into the app.vue file to remove the big Vue logo, just so we have more room to check out the grid component. Everything else in here looks like it's okay, and it can stay for now. We'll save and close that and the rest of these files because now we only have one more file to change, the source components hello.vue file. Again, usually we would separate the grid into its own component, but for today, let's just stick it in here. First, we'll remove all of the old code and change the class to grid for clarity's sake. Now we can start adding our Kendo components, starting with the data source. Kendo data source will have a parameter of its reference, the type of data that this data source is, page size, which is how many data items to display on the page as a default, and the transport read, since we're grabbing this data from another location. In this case, we're just using an SVC file from our demos. Oops, let me fix that syntax. Then we'll close out the Kendo data source component. Next up on the docket is finally the Kendo grid. Inside here, we'll apply some grid settings. Height, that's pretty self-explanatory. Data source ref is the data source we just added above. Then we're going to give our grid some functionality by making the data both groupable and sortable. We'll see this in action once we run the code. We also let the pages of data, not just the page in the app itself, be refreshable. We also let the user change the page size. And also give them buttons per page to navigate around the data. I find the next step very straightforward. We first added the Kendo UI grid component, and now inside there we add the Kendo grid columns component. This first Kendo grid columns component will be displaying the contact's name. From our data source file, we bound to this grid. The field matches the key to the data we have, and it will fill in the value. The title is the header of that column. The width of the column is 250 pixels, because I said so. I've added 3 more columns from our data source. The second and third have no width and will fit in where they can. Then we close out the Kendo grid component. I've also scrapped all the other styling and just added a padding around the grid for readability. If we open the terminal, we can see I already had it compiling in the background, thanks to the Vue CLI, with every save. So if we go to localhost 8080, we can see our beautiful grid. The scrolling and hover, all these actions all come from that Kendo UI styling that we added. Since we made our grid sortable, you can click a header and the data will sort by that column. On the bottom is the page menu, where the user can request how many items per page are displayed. And on the bottom left is where we are paginating the data. And since we chose 5 as our pageable button count, that's how many page buttons you can choose from, as well as click around to navigate the arrows to go through the pages. Since we made the groupable option true, you can also drag a column header to the top to group all those grid items that match that column property. And we just had to install the Kendo modules and hook them up to our component. This is much easier and faster than piecing together all of that information to form a grid in Vue or React or Angular or jQuery, which are all the options we have to use Kendo UI with. So you can check out and play around with more of our demos on our demos.telric.com page. There are demos for the same component in Angular, jQuery, Vue, and React implementations. It's pretty fun. Come play. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on Twitter. I'm at TZManix, and all of us on the team are at Kendo UI. We would love to hear from you. I cannot wait to see what you create. Thanks for hanging out with me this afternoon, and happy coding.
Thanks, Tara. Amazing stuff. I can't wait to see how our customers can take advantage of our latest release. I'm especially jazzed about our wrappers for Vue. Definitely some new ground for us and our customers being discovered here. There's one more thing I'd like to cover before wrapping up, and that's telric reporting. As some of you may know, telric reporting uses Kendo UI under the covers to render out beautiful and highly informative charts as part of our reporting solution. In our last release, we introduced a preview of telric reporting with our Angular Viewer component. This was a significant milestone for us and one that many customers had asked for. In the latest release of telric reporting, we're introducing more features and improvements that make it that much better. For example, we've added Web Report Preview accessibility, enabling wider user audiences to view web report previews. Our HTML5-based report viewers support major accessibility features like comprehensive keyboard navigation in both the viewer and its content, and dynamically extended markup that provides support for the most popular screen readers. We've also added new financial charts to telric reporting. The OHLC series are designed to represent information about price movement of a stock over a period of time using candlestick or bar markers. And finally, we've implemented a bunch of performance improvements. For example, we've improved the Excel grid generation algorithm that significantly reduces the time required for rendering huge reports to Excel. PDF rendering also now handles the report pages continuously. This enables us to release .NET objects that keep page structure immediately after the page is rendered. Overall, telric reporting is a great product and should be strongly considered by folks using Kendo UI. Well, that about wraps things up for us. Before we go, I'd like to share with you a couple of announcements. On October 11th, we'll be hosting the Telric UI Tools R3 release webinar. Please make sure to register. You'll hear and see everything that's latest and greatest in our R3 2017 release. Also later this year, we'll be hosting separate webinars for our wrappers for Kendo UI for Vue and React. The purpose of these webinars is to provide you with a deeper dive of what you saw here today. We also hope to provide more updates on the product line at that time. So, keep an eye on the Kendo UI website along with your email inboxes. Invites to these webinars will be sent out later this year. On behalf of Tara and the rest of us at Progress, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We hope you can take advantage of the features and improvements you've seen here today. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. See you next time.